Okay, so we've seen how that we can spawn an emitter at a particular location. And just to reiterate, when we overlap with our box, we spawn a particle emitter at the location of our myActor, which actually we've added a little bit in the Z component, so it actually appears above it. So if we go back into myActor, we'll see that we get our getActor location node, which will return the location of this actor's root component. Essentially, that box is what we made to be our root component. And so getActor location will return that location. Now, we can also get the location of individual components. So if I clicked on the cone and I right click here and I type get location, you'll see down here we have get world location, and there are versions for the box and for the cone. So if we choose the one for the cone, you'll see that we have get world location and its target is cone. And this brings up an important point, that when you have a node that has this target input pin, that means that this function is being it belongs to a specific class, and in this case the cone has its own get world location function, and that's why you have to plug in cone. Now you'll see for get actor location, this is a function that belongs to myActor. This is something that was inherited from the actor class, and because myActor is an actor, it inherits that get actor location function already built in. And so the self is automatically populated for the target, and that's basically like saying pass in this myActor as the target, because this myActor is the owner for this function. And you can always get a reference to self by right clicking and typing in self, and you'll see this get a reference to self, and then this gives you a self node. So this right here, target self, is the same thing as getting a reference to self and plugging it right in there. So this is the same thing. So I'm going to break that and delete it. But self is just referring to the actual blueprint that you're in, the actor whose blueprint you're inside of at the time. And so some functions belong to the myActor, like getActor location, in which case self is just okay to leave as is as the target. But for get world location, this is a function that belongs to components. So if I break this, then you'll see that the target becomes self, and it's not the same as plugging in cone. So if I hit compile there, you'll see that it'll compile just fine, and we can drag this in and use this instead, get world location, use that instead. But when you hit compile, you'll see this error here in the compiler results, and it'll say this blueprint self is not a scene component, therefore target must have a connection. So this get world location, it's a function of a scene component, and mesh components are scene components. They inherit from that parent, the scene component. And so you cannot just call get world location without plugging in a valid target, and leaving it as self is the same thing as, like I said, getting a reference to self and plugging it in. And a reference to self in this case is this myActor. So it's like you're plugging an actor in here, but this is not an actor function, it's a uScene component function. So we have to have a scene component to plug in. And like I said, static meshes and box components, these are considered scene components, so they work. So if I compile this now, it actually works. So you'll see that instead now of get actor location, if we use get world location and plug that into the spawn emitter at location node, now we're getting the cone location, the location of the cone mesh component. We are still breaking it and adding 250 to the Z component, so this fire now should appear above the cone. So if we go ahead and hit play and we overlap, you'll see the fire now appears above the cone. So we have these nodes to get the location of something, and we have both versions for the overall actor itself, and we have versions for individual components. And so depending on the situation, you can use one or the other. And just remember that for an actor function like getActor location, the target is self, and so you can leave that as is. But for a component function such as getWorld location, you need to plug in the component that you wish to get the location of. And this is also why when you right click, you'll see a check mark here where it says context sensitive. And what this does is it filters out any functions that are not relevant at the time. So right clicking here and typing get location, for example, you'll see that we'll get these get actor location here. And then of course, because this particular actor has a box and a cone, you'll see get world location for the individual box and the cone themselves. But if I were to take this cone here and break the connection and drag off of it, and I type get location, you're going to see that I only see get world location. I don't see get actor location. And that's because context sensitive has filtered that function out because I'm dragging off of the cone directly. And so it's only showing functions that are relevant to the particular cone that I'm dragging off of. Now, if I want, I can see the other functions by unchecking context sensitive, and you'll see that get actor location should be visible somewhere here. In fact, there are so many things that pop up that I may, in fact, have to type actor here. So if I say actor, then you see get actor location. But when context sensitive was checked, there's nothing there because get actor location is not really relevant to the cone. So with context sensitive checked, you will filter out functions that are not relevant. But if you're searching for a function and you can't understand why it's not showing up, it may be filtered out, and unchecking context sensitive may show it. And then when you select it, you'll see that the pin was not connected because a cone cannot go into get actor location. Only an actor can. So you would need some actor to plug in here or leave it as self, and that would be the same thing as plugging in a reference to the actor, this actor that you're in. So that's what context sensitive does for you. So we've seen how to use a component's location using get world location for that component, and this will work if you have a component to get the location of. But what if you want the location of a particular spot relative to your actor, but you don't want to put a mesh there? You want just a location that you can get. You can use get world location of it. So you want some sort of component, but you don't want really a mesh or anything visible. And that's what we can use something called a scene component for. So if we click add component and type in scene, and we'll see here that we have the option to select a scene. Now we have this scene, and it by default is parented to the box, just like the cone. And if you see it indented one level further like this, that means it would be attached to the cone. The cone would be its parent. But if you drag on top of the parent, it will unparent it. And now it's just parented to the root component, which is the box. So we have this scene component. And what exactly is a scene component? Well, if we come in here into the viewport and we have the scene component selected, we'll see that we can move it around. We have the widget for moving things around in the world, and we can move this to any location relative to the actor that we want. So if I move it over here, for example, now the scene component has the location over there. Now, a scene component doesn't have a mesh, so it doesn't have a visual representation in the world. However, if you look over to the details panel in the transform section, it has a location, rotation, and a scale. And for this reason, we can move it around, and we can orient it and so on. Now, since we have a location here, in the event graph, if we want, we can call get world location from the scene component itself. So if we drag it in and we click, we get it, right? So we drag it in, you'll notice that we can't set a scene component because it's just a very specific type of component. You can't drag it in and click set. You can only get it. And when you get it and drag it into get world location, instead of using the cone, now get world location will return a vector that is the location of our scene component. So over here where we put it in the viewport. So when we do this and we call the spawn emitter at location, now we're going to spawn some fire at the location where we put our scene component. So if we come back and hit play and go ahead and overlap, we'll see that the fire, actually it looks like it's still showing up above our box component, so something is not quite updating. So if I go ahead and hit escape and take this actor here and right click on it we can, let's see, I'm looking for delete, but I don't think I'm not seeing it. So I can just click it and hit the delete button. So I just deleted it. Now I can drag in a new My Actor and hit play, and hopefully it's updated now. It looks like it's possible that it actually was spawning in the correct location. So let me see if moving this to a more obvious location will allow us to more easily see that it's spawning at the scene component location. So I'm going to move it over here to the side, and I'm going to hit play. And as I overlap, yes, it actually was working before, so we didn't actually need to delete it and bring it back in. And so what's happening is we're spawning the fire over there at that scene component's location. And of course, we are still adding 250 to the Z component of it, but we are able to actually position a 3D widget somewhere in our blueprint, and then we're able to get the location of that scene component. So a scene component is very similar to a static mesh component, but it doesn't have a mesh. You can think of it as an empty, and in some software packages like Blender, there are actually things called empties, which you drag into the scene, and they're used for their location or their orientation or something like that. And they don't have a mesh. They don't have any other assets other than basically a location, and that's all that they're good for. And so that's what a scene component is. And you may recall that when we first created this actor, by default, its root was a scene component. It didn't have a mesh or anything like that. It was just a scene component. And you can remind yourself by right-clicking in here and creating a new blueprint and basing it off of actor, and then double-clicking on that and opening it up, and you'll see that it has a root component. Its name is default scene root, and this is a scene component. And so it doesn't have a mesh or anything like that. It's just by default what's used for the root. So I'm going to close that out, and I'm going to go ahead and delete that because we don't really need that blueprint. And this will conclude this concept, which is basically that we can get a location of an individual component, and that is in addition to being able to get the actor's location, which will return the location of the root component anyway. But if you want an individual component's location, you can use get world location, and that is a specific location to scene components. And remember, boxes are scene components are scene components. And you can think of a static mesh or a box or some other scene component as being like a class based off of the parent scene component. So scene component has functions in it like get world location, and because a mesh component is a child of the scene component class, it inherits that get world location function along with other functions and variables and things that scene component has. So this is a sort of programmer related concept, this concept of inheritance, and that's basically that any type of object can be based off of another type of object and inherit those qualities, variables, and functions that parent object has, and in addition to that they can have their own unique functionality, such as static meshes. So like a static mesh component like this cone, it has a location, rotation, and scale. That's something that it inherits from its parent class scene component, but it has an additional property called static mesh, which is a static mesh that allows you to have a mesh to represent it in the world. And so it has additional qualities that just a regular scene component does not have. So that will conclude this video, and in the next video we're going to continue working with our scene component and do some more exciting things here in Blueprints. So stay tuned.